So thank you for joining us. A big thanks to our valued sponsors, IOPSA. Their valued input enables us to bring these webinars to you. So I'm just putting my camera on. As you can see, I am a real life person, so this isn't a pre-recorded seminar. However, just from a bandwidth perspective, I am going to keep the camera off. Please relax and enjoy the webinar. If you lose connection, do not panic. It should automatically reconnect. If it does not, then you can simply log back in the same way as you logged in the beginning. If I can ask you to please stay behind the webinar to rate the webinar, this enables us to provide you with a better experience going forward. This is a live recording which will be available for those that may need a refresher or to answer the assessment. Questions are most welcome. We generally allow questions at the end, but if there is something during the course of the conversation that pops up and you'd like some clarity on it, please do stop and ask a question. The orange arrow hides and unhides your panel. Your mic is muted. If we unmute you for a question, you may need to do so on your side as well. Raising your hand is straightforward, green for go and red for stop. Questions, just click on the plus. If there are any handouts, you can click to download from here as well. During the session, there will be a poll that pops up on your screen. As they do that, you can click on your selection and we'll review the mass vote straight away. Right, so to get straight into the session for today, the topic today is plumbers who are servicing business but exempt from BEE. What does this whole BEE thing mean to you, and what are the initiatives that IOPSA has on the go at the moment that might be relevant to you and might be of use to you? So if I pop down to the next slide, what you'll see is that, it would help if we were going down to the next slide. You will see that we have a number of stakeholders that IOPSA is engaging at the moment. That's the construction companies and plumbers that sit under the construction industry, the insurers who are actually paying for plumbers to come in and do jobs based on insurance claims, and then finally the manufacturers who are actually having their equipment installed. And as noted earlier, the topic for today, or the focus area from an audience perspective, is on plumbers. So that's the first gray section. Right, so the first section of what we're going to have a look at today is plumbers and how they fit into BEE in the first place, so that everyone can understand what should they be caring about from a BEE perspective, and what information in the BEE space is actually relevant to them. So the first thing to cover is firstly how the BEE legislation has changed over time and what legislation is currently relevant for plumbers. So back in 2007, that's when the DTI Codes of Good Practice came into law. Now, around about the same time, shortly thereafter, there was a draft construction sector code that was published for comment. And that code took around 2 years to be gazetted, and it was passed into law in 2009. So since 2009, up until fairly recently, the construction sector, which includes plumbers, has been measuring itself on this construction code. What happened, though, is that in 2015, the DTI codes changed, and the construction code, along with a number of other sectors, was supposed to update their sector codes largely in line with the changes to the generic DTI codes. Sectors were given about 18 months to do this, and in the case of the construction code, this wasn't enough time, and the DTI felt that the construction sector was taking too long to amend the construction code. So what happened in 2016 is that the construction code was actually repealed. And instead of the construction code being valid, the generic DTI codes apply. So the generic DTI codes are the codes that apply to most companies in South Africa. Any company that doesn't have a specific sector that they measure, like the financial sector or the agriculture sector or the transport sector, as examples. So what this means is that since 2016, plumbers have been required to measure the generic DTI code. And then, if that wasn't complicated enough, what happened at the end of 2016 is that the construction sector finally managed to come to an agreement, as well as an agreement with the DTI, and the construction sector published a draft construction sector code. Of course, a new draft construction sector code, so that it looks sufficiently enough like the new generic codes that it would be passed into law. Now, when exactly this sector code will be passed into law, we are not clear. We hear rumors from the Construction Sector Council that it would be published by the end of the first quarter this year. Now, there's about 3 business days left to go to the end of the first quarter of this year, so it is unclear whether it will actually be gazetted immediately, but for all intents and purposes, we are expecting it to probably be gazetted at some point during the course of this year. So moving on to the next page then, the first thing to understand, once one understands that one's measuring the generic DTI codes, is what size company is your business, and therefore what do you have to measure? Now, the topic of today's discussion is companies that are exempt from BEE and that need to measure a slightly different code. Companies that are exempt from BEE but that are doing business with other businesses and that are feeling BEE pressure. So what that means is that automatically there is some need for you to do BEE. However, if your turnover is less than 10 million rand, then you are automatically exempt from BEE. So you're considered an exempted micro-enterprise. So that is what an EME is, and you are automatically a level 4. Businesses that have a turnover between 10 and 50 million rand have to measure qualifying small enterprise scorecard, and we have a webinar on what that looks like next week. Companies that have a turnover of more than 50 million rand have to measure the generic codes, and they're quite large businesses. Now, what's quite interesting as well is that under the draft construction code, there are a few amendments to exempted micro-enterprises, and those proposed amendments are that companies that have black ownership of less than 30% are actually level 5, not level 4, and then there are staggered tiers for companies that have black ownership of 30% and so on. So companies that have got 51% black ownership are automatically a level 2, and companies that have got 100% black ownership are automatically a level 1. Now, under the generic codes, affidavits are acceptable, which means that if you are a plumbing company and if your turnover is less than 10 million rand, then you need to sign an affidavit that says this information. There are templates that are available, and nobody except the person who is responsible for signing such documents from the company can sign that. So your auditor can't sign that, your financial manager can't sign that. Typically, it is an executive director of the company that would sign that affidavit to say that they are automatically exempt or automatically the level 2 or the level 1. So moving on to the next slide. Sorry, this seems to be taking a while. So what does this actually mean? We hear about level 2s and level 1s and so on, but what does it actually mean for you and your business? So some of you may have heard level 4 bandied about quite a lot. I've already mentioned level 4 as an EME. It's the generally accepted good level under BEE. And what it means is that companies that are a level 4 have between 80 and 90 points under BEE, and their BEE recognition is 100%. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you what that means. So just to then touch on level 1 and level 2, level 1 means 135% recognition, and level 2 means 125% recognition. Moving on to the next slide, then, what does that actually mean in real terms? So what that means is that if a company, let's say a large construction company is using your services, let's say that they are spending 1,000 Rand in total across all of their procurement with everybody. Let's say that 220 Rand is from a level 1 company and 280 Rand is from a level 7 company, and so on and so forth. You can see the example on the slide. For each and every supplier that money is spent with, the BEE status has to be applied to that. So 220 Rand at level 1 is 135% recognition, and so that translates to additional spend. The 280 Rand that you see there from a level 7 company is multiplied at 50%, meaning that only 140 Rand of that is recognized. So in total, at the end of the day, one adds up the total amount of money that is spent with black-owned companies, black-empowered companies, and compares that against the target. The target is 80%, so it gets compared against 800 Rand, and you'll see that that's how companies get points. So what's important here is that a BE level translates directly into how much recognition a client can obtain from using your services. And if that client is the end consumer, well, that end consumer doesn't care because they don't have to get a BE certificate. But if that client is a business that has to measure BEE, then what happens is that they have to account for their BEE spend and get a BEE certificate. Sorry, if you can just give me one moment. I just want to try to solve a problem with my presentation.
Alana?
Yeah.
Okay. Just in your control panel, just push the red arrow because we can see your control panel. It's going over the slide.
Okay, I don't understand why, because last week it was perfectly fine. It just means that I'm not able to see any information that comes to me. But that's fine. I can do that. Last week it was working fine as long as I was on the presentation.
Okay.
Anyway, moving on. So as I was saying, for companies that then have to measure BEE, this becomes relevant and important to them. So moving on to the next slide then, what you'll see is that this is how the DTI codes work in terms of buying from businesses. And one isn't measuring just the first line item, which is the example that I showed on the previous slide, where construction companies buy from a company of any shape or size. Construction companies and insurers and so on and so forth, they have to measure the extent to which they are buying from small businesses, which is the second and third line items, the qualifying small enterprises and the exempted micro enterprises. And they also need to measure the extent to which they are buying from companies that are 51% black owned and 30% black women owned. So if I move on to the next page, sorry, I thought that I had another page there, but what this illustrates is how important it is for companies to be, it illustrates how important it is for companies to be 51% black owned, or why there is pressure on companies to be 51% black owned. If you are an exempted micro enterprise, it means that you don't have to do BEE. It means you're automatically a level 4. But you'll be able to provide additional recognition for a construction company because you'll get measured on the first line item, and you'll also get measured on the third line item because that company is buying from you as an exempted micro enterprise. But if your plumbing business is not 51% black owned, then that construction company would not be able to get additional benefit from you under the line items of being 51% black owned or 30% black women owned. So what that is illustrating is just how important it is for companies to be buying from 51% black-owned companies, and why there's quite a lot of pressure in the industry, whereas this pressure didn't exist before. Under the old codes, companies could do quite well under the procurement scorecard without having to worry so much about buying from black-owned businesses. But under the new codes, these requirements have changed and there is a lot more pressure that exists now. Right, so moving on to the next page, we're talking in this section about I'm exempted from BEE and my annual turnover is less than 10 million rand. Do I need to do anything? So there's two parts to this. The first is, well, do you need to do anything? And then the second part is, IOPSA is running a program to develop small businesses. Some of those businesses may be black, some of them may not be black, but we'd like to just give you a sense of how you can get benefit from that program. So essentially, what we're looking at in this section is, if you're exempt from BEE, then small black-owned plumbers, the reality is that they are going to be more in demand with insurers and construction companies and other businesses. So I've indicated why that is. We can explain a little bit more in more detail in the next slide. The next question is, can you still participate with the skills that you do have and not lose your business? So we're going to look at that. And then the third question is, well, is it possible to grow your business using BEE? And then moving on to the section around benefiting from the IOPSA program, questions that we're going to answer there is, do you have a need for more staff, but staffing up is expensive and you don't want to take the risk? And then the fifth question is, do you have the interest and skills to mentor a black plumber that is running or wants to run its own business? So those are the questions that we're going to address in this next section. So we've had a quick look already at how businesses get points from their plumbers BEE scorecards. The next slide illustrates in a little bit more detail what I was explaining earlier around buying from a white-owned exempted micro-enterprise. The R1 recognition that one gets in the first section and the R1's worth of recognition as an EME gives an overall R2 worth of recognition. But the comparison to the 51% black-owned qualifying small enterprise or exempted micro-enterprise is so much higher in the sense that a construction company buying from a 51% black-owned business can get between R3.75 and R6.75's worth of business from that, from buying from that business. So there is really a big incentive for construction companies to be buying from these types of businesses. The next scenario that we're wanting to have a look at is, well, if you as your business, it's never going to be 51% black owned, what could you possibly do? So one option here is if one of the factors involved here is that you're coordinating a large number of plumbers, perhaps you are subcontracting some work back to different plumbers, then something to consider here is that you could still provide a valuable service to an insurer or a construction company by being as you are the white-owned exempted micro-enterprise, but actually allow any of the other plumbing subcontractors that you normally use, you could allow them to service the insurer or the construction company directly. So what that means is that each of those subcontractors would invoice to the construction company directly, and you would invoice to the construction company for the time that you spend doing the work that you do, including the management and coordination of all of the work that they do. So on the one hand, this can, of course, result in lower profitability for your business because it's possible that you were making a margin off the work that the subcontractors were doing. However, in an environment where you are looking to make yourselves relevant to construction companies, even if they are not sufficiently happy with your level 4 BE status, this is one area in which you could really excel by playing that coordinating and project management role and earning a fee for doing that. And in the meantime, IOPSA could be developing and supporting the training of those plumbers in the background so that they are better able and better equipped to do the work that you are busy coordinating. So that's an example of where you can be relevant to those companies, even if you only have a level 4. Of course, the next question that arises is, well, it doesn't matter what I do, a level 4 isn't good enough, or it doesn't matter what I do, I'm not going to be able to grow my business if, as a level 4. And you might be interested in how can you use BEE to grow your business. So what we have on this page here, page 14, is an example of where, let's just use scenario 1 because it is simpler, where you as a plumbing company provide a service directly, let's say, to an insurer or a construction company. This is, of course, as opposed to an end consumer. So in this instance, if the plumbing company, your company, which was currently a white-owned business, could find partners that could build that business into a 51% black-owned plumbing business, then if your business became 51% black-owned, you would be able to access support growth and possibly in the future an ultimate exit for your business. So, for example, there are contributions available under supply development or enterprise development from the insurers and manufacturers, which could see your business being further developed. It could mean more staff for your business. It could mean working capital. There could be a range of opportunities that you could access, whether it's through IOPSA or not, in order to grow your business. And of course, outside of any support from supply development or enterprise development, as we saw in the previous example, the fact that your business is 51% black owned would naturally be a deep incentive for the insurers and the construction companies to be using more of your services because they get so much recognition for it. Moving on to the next example number 4. In this example, this is not relevant to having any black shareholding at all. It's simply a standalone example which says, well, are you interested in accessing affordable and well-trained staff? So in our engagements with plumbing companies, one of the challenges that has arisen is that most organizations would like more capacity within their business, but the capacity comes at the cost of committing to paying additional salaries, and that brings about risk for the business. So in this example, which would be through an initiative by IOPSA, it is actually an example where plumbers would be able to secure free or subsidized staffing in the short term that would actually in the longer term help to develop better trained staff at lower cost, which would increase productivity and profitability. So what this looks like is that IOPSA would be doing technical training with some existing and some future black plumbers. So there are many plumbers out there, the skills vary. So this isn't necessarily about bringing new plumbers into the fold, it's also about taking existing plumbers and developing their skills. So they would go on to a technical training program. But a key component of that technical training is for those plumbers to get on-the-job experience. And in order for them to get that qualification at the end of the day, they have to have that on-the-job experience working as a plumber in a plumbing company so that they can ultimately get their certificate. So under the BEE codes, this can actually be paid for by the insurers and the manufacturers, for example. And those insurers and manufacturers can even be paying towards the cost of the salaries of these black plumbers. So the opportunity here for your plumbing business is if you wanted to get additional resources into your business, you could sign up for this program whereby you provide the on-the-job work experience and mentorship and coaching to these plumbers, and they come in and actually work in your business. So it's not entirely for free in the sense that, of course, you have to provide a quid pro quo in return, but even the bulk of the salary of these plumbers could potentially be covered through this program. And this could see significant benefit for yourselves and your business. Right, the fifth scenario that I just wanted to cover then is in the event that you or anyone in your business is interested in mentoring a black plumber to run his own business. So on the previous slide, we covered the technical skills that are so important to a plumber. But for any plumbers that, especially those who are running their own business, they may be quite low on administration support and other kinds of business support. And not only do you have to go out and do the actual work, but you also need to know how to run that business. You need to know how to cost your jobs and price your jobs. You need to know how to deal with the bank. You need to know how to deal with finances and administration and paperwork and invoices, and how to go and find more business and how to get jobs and so on. So this is a little different to the technical training of plumbers, and this is really all around how they manage their business. And you might be involved in a business, and perhaps you are at the point now where you have a number of staff who are doing a lot of the work for you, and you may have some extra free time, and you might be interested in mentoring a black plumber to run his own business. And what this really would entail is you don't have to do BEE, so this isn't something of, oh, I'm going to do this to get BEE points. Other companies might look at an option like that. But it's possible that IOPSA might actually pay the mentors that they ultimately select to mentor and coach these future black plumbers. And for any of you who are interested in the example that we raised a little bit earlier of actually becoming a 51% black-owned business, this is a good way to potentially identify plumbers, individuals that you might want to partner with in the future in terms of working with them and seeing how they operate. Right, so the next section then says that it's possible that your business will not be able to achieve an acceptable level of compliance without some black ownership. Or put another way, you want to grow your business and you want to achieve 51% black ownership. So what are the options that are available to you? So what page 18 looks at is a couple of different scenarios. So the one scenario is that you're servicing the end consumer. That was mostly for people who were on the call last week. The middle option is you're exempt, but you're servicing businesses. So that's typically the audience that we're talking to today. And then the final example is you service businesses as a QSE or as a generic company. So again, probably not the audience for today. The main focus will be the middle block. So this middle block says that from a BE ownership perspective, we know that BE is not a requirement. And your opportunity here is to grow your business. Now, in that case, only 51% black ownership is required. Nothing more, and certainly nothing less. So having 10% or 25% or any of those other numbers that some organizations out there would be dealing with is not going to be relevant for you. It's really 51% or 100% or nothing. What are the kinds of BE shareholders, if you were considering going this route, that you would bring on board? Well, there are three types of shareholders. The first shareholder is one or more trusted individual partners. So in terms of being involved in a plumbing business, this is most likely someone who is already within your business. Perhaps there's more than one person who you identify as being able to potentially take over the running of the business in the future. And the example that I gave on one of the earlier slides as well about coaching or mentoring someone to have his own business, that could be a way to identify one or more trusted individual partners if there isn't somebody currently in your business that you think could grow into that position, but you're wanting to do a BE transaction. The second example is around employees. So although it is less common for employees to own a business to the tune of 51%, it's not completely unheard of, and it is those kinds of options do exist. And in this example, typically what would happen is some kind of trust would be created where employees would benefit from that trust. They would have linked units in that trust, and the trust itself is what would own the shares within the plumbing company. And all of the employees in that employee scheme would need to be black employees from your business, but they collectively would own that 51% and benefit from that 51%. And that is a way that you can achieve the 51% black ownership without having to be dealing with an individual person as a partner. Having said that, ultimately, if you're wanting to exit your business in a few years, it's very unlikely that an employee scheme would be able to run a business going forward. It's a good way to benefit employees, but typically a business needs one or two clear leaders who are going to take the business forward and also get the benefit from it. And then the third kind of BEE shareholder that you could consider if you wanted to become 51% black owned is a broad-based trust. Now, it's on the list because it's relevant and it's possible, but it's probably less likely that any of you would choose that route over your employees. And also that you would probably find a trust that would be wanting to take the ownership in your business. But typically a broad-based trust is a trust that has beneficiaries who are not necessarily named as at an individual level, but where benefit flows to certain projects. So, for example, we've seen companies that have created broad-based trusts instead of employee trusts, where the money that goes into that trust goes to support the education of the children of employees, for example, or pays bursaries for those children once they're adults to go and study further. So that is really a broad-based trust. It might be linked back to employees, but it's not individual rands and cents being paid over to employees. Page 19, then, I'm not going to go through the details of it, but it is just to raise awareness with yourselves that the DTI is not always in favor of broad-based trusts and employee share ownership schemes. They are perfectly legal if they meet the requirements, but the DTI does prefer to see individuals that own shares in a business. So certainly if you were going to look at doing a 51% BE transaction, it could be worthwhile to consider involving an individual, or more than one if suitable, from within your company that you see as being able to take over the running of the company, but also to then include employees in that transaction. And in that way, everybody gets a benefit out of the BE transaction, and it's not limited to just one person, but you are still addressing the issue of who's going to take over the running of this business at some point in the future when you would like to retire. The final slide that I have this afternoon then is really just to briefly say, if you were going to consider doing a BE ownership transaction for your business, what are the different things that you would need to consider? And I'm just going to run through those briefly. We don't need to talk to it in too much detail because there's a lot more work if one wanted to do this that one would have to do in order to actually implement something. But the kinds of things that one wants to think about is, what are you trying to achieve? And what are your key guiding principles? When implementing ownership, there are always going to be trade-offs. There isn't really a world in which the perfect BE partner comes along and they're willing to buy your business for exactly how much you want someone to pay for it, and have the cash on the table to buy the shares up front, etc. So one really has to consider the trade-offs so that when answering other questions, one knows, where the compromises will have to take place. Other questions that are probably most relevant to an organization of your size is, what is the value of the business? So how is that going to be determined? How long is the empowerment required? And how long does the transaction need to last? Sometimes these transactions can last for a fixed period of time as opposed to indefinitely into the future. How would you choose the best type of, or the most suitable BE partner for your business? We talked a little bit about that on the previous slide. And then probably the key final question is, how will you actually structure and fund the transaction so that the BE requirements are being met and that you are managing the implications like tax implications for your business? So just to be aware that if you did want to go ahead and do something in terms of the BE ownership, that there are quite a lot of questions and details that would need to be addressed from there. That really is it from my side this afternoon in terms of the presentation. Thanks very much, everyone, for your time.